In the late 1990s, New York was alive with noise. Horns blaring, comedians hustling through dingy clubs, and dreamers trying to carve out space in a city that swallowed most of them whole. Amid that chaos, in a small apartment with barely any furniture, lived Jimmy Fallon. His coffee table wasn't bought at IKEA. It was literally made of cardboard boxes. He wasn't broke because he lacked ambition. He was broke because he had gambled everything on one impossible dream: Saturday Night Live. Jimmy once admitted in a letter that if he didn't make it onto SNL, life itself might feel meaningless. He wasn't joking. For him, there was no backup plan, no sitcom safety net. No, if this doesn't work, I'll teach, I'll code, I'll try something else. It was SNL or nothing. And here's the paradox. Jimmy wasn't the loudest in the room, the alpha comic, the one who could dominate a stage with sheer presence. He was awkward, almost shy, someone who laughed at his own jokes and stumbled through conversations. Yet hidden in that awkwardness was the very thing that made him magnetic: vulnerability. As a boy in upstate New York, he wasn't the class clown disrupting lessons. He was the kid in the back, obsessed with voices: Elvis, Jerry Seinfeld, Adam Sandler. His room became a private stage where he practiced endlessly, cracking himself up in the mirror. To his parents, it was funny. To Jimmy, it was training. Every laugh he heard at home felt like a promise. If he could make them laugh, maybe he could make the whole country laugh. That belief bordered on delusion, but the best dreams often do. Most people told him he was naive. Jimmy told himself he was already halfway there. Night after night, in that apartment with cardboard furniture, he rehearsed. He sent out audition tapes filled with guitar sketches, nervous impressions, and that childlike grin he couldn't hide. The world outside dismissed him, but inside his own head, the show had already begun. This is where the story of Jimmy Fallon truly starts. Not on a big stage, not under bright lights, but in the quiet faith of a young man who refused to let go of a ridiculous dream. The cardboard apartment in New York wasn't where Jimmy Fallon's dream began. That was simply the battleground. The roots stretched back to a quiet childhood in upstate New York, where a shy boy discovered his voice by borrowing everyone else's. Jimmy wasn't the class clown, the kid who disrupted lessons to get attention. He was the boy in the corner, studying sound. His notebooks weren't filled with math equations. They were scripts, fragments of dialogue, phonetic scribbles. His mirror wasn't for brushing his hair. It was his stage. He imitated everything: Elvis crooning with exaggerated lip curls, Seinfeld whining about nothing in particular, Adam Sandler's goofy voices. He'd switch personas in seconds, cracking himself up, collapsing onto his bed in laughter. To his parents, it was hilarious. To Jimmy, it was practice. Every chuckle at the dinner table was proof he could make people feel something. But beneath the laughter was vulnerability. Jimmy wasn't confident. He wasn't the biggest or boldest kid in the room. What he had was a willingness to look silly, to risk embarrassment, to lean into awkwardness. And that awkwardness became magnetic. Comedy for Fallon wasn't armor, it was exposure. Each impression wasn't just an escape from himself. It was a way of saying, "This is me," imperfect, playful, vulnerable, but willing to try. Most kids dream of being astronauts or athletes. Jimmy had one vision: Saturday Night Live. He would sit glued to the TV, studying every sketch, memorizing every cadence. Belushi, Murphy, Sandler. He wasn't just laughing, he was learning. He saw SNL not as entertainment, but as destiny. It's easy to dismiss a kid's obsession as a phase, but Fallon treated his dream like oxygen. He mailed audition tapes filled with voices and guitar sketches long before he had any real shot. He whispered to himself at night that one day he'd be on that stage. To outsiders, it seemed absurd. To Jimmy, it was inevitable. His friends thought he was over the top. Teachers said he should focus on something practical. But Jimmy didn't want a practical life. He wanted a risky one, the kind where if you miss big, but if you land, you touch history. This wasn't just a boy doing impressions. It was the beginning of a lifelong pattern, taking insecurity, awkwardness, and self-doubt, and turning them into connection. The boy at the mirror didn't outgrow the mirror, he carried it with him. In college basements and tiny clubs, he set up a new one, a microphone, a nervous grin, a room that wasn't sure yet. Every night, the same ritual: impressions, guitar, a joke that worked yesterday and mysteriously failed tonight. He wrote it all down anyway. SNL wasn't a poster on the wall, it was the North Star. While friends chased broader dreams, TV, movies, anything, his compass had a single letter at every point, Lorne. He studied cadence like a language, rewound sketches until the tape wore thin, circled the moments where a choice in timing turned amusing into unforgettable. Not fame, not money, craft. Open mics taught a harsher curriculum than any class. The silence after a punchline, the fluorescent hum of a half-empty bar, someone clinking ice at the worst possible moment. That environment polishes either your material or your resolve. Ideally both. On good nights he floated home, on bad ones he walked. No headphones, just the city, letting the sting fade like a film. He made audition tapes in cramped rooms, a lamp balanced on a stack of books for lighting, a friend hitting record and trying not to laugh off camera. No fancy edits, just velocity. Setups that sprinted, impressions that arrived like jump cuts, songs that stitched one voice into the next. He wasn't trying to seem perfect, he was trying to prove he could be useful. On SNL, useful means versatile. Cold opens, update desk, a character that saves a sketch at minute 3. People kept saying the same line, have a backup plan. He nodded, smiled, and went back to the notebook. The pages read like a weather report of a young performer's mind. Tighter Seinfeld, quieter Elvis, find the heart before the gag. He didn't guard the insecurities, he cataloged them. If a bit died, it got an autopsy. If it lived, it got a blueprint. There's a very specific loneliness to chasing one stage. You start to see the world through its doorway. Street conversations become crowd work you'll never do. Cashiers become characters you may never play. Every experience quietly asks, can this become 5 seconds of something honest? He wasn't collecting applause, he was collecting truth he could deliver at 11:30 p.m. on a Saturday. A first meeting led to a first almost. Encouraging words, no guarantees. The type of maybe that tests a person's center of gravity. He went home and tightened everything. Shaved beats off punchlines, moved the chorus sooner, rehearsed a new swing between characters so seamless it felt like a card trick. If the door opened again, he wouldn't knock, he'd step. New York can be cruel, it can also be kind in strange ways. A bartender who gives you one more minute after the light. A veteran comic who says, keep that third thing, ditch the first two. A stranger who laughs at the exact moment you wondered if you should quit. He pocketed those moments like coins, bus fare for the next mile. Obsession can harden people. His did the opposite. Each attempt stripped away bravado and revealed something that audiences would later recognize instantly, a performer who wanted you in on the joy. The confidence wasn't in being the coolest person in the room. It was in making the room feel welcome inside whatever he was building. Eventually, a second chance materialized, an audition with real gravity. The room would be sparse, the faces unreadable, the air drier than any stage. He prepared for silence as if it were part of the script. If the laugh came, he'd ride it. If it didn't, he'd keep the rhythm anyway. That's the job. Deliver timing even when time refuses to help. The night before, he did the only thing he trusted. He ran the set again. Voices, song, a quick turn, a small surprise. He closed the notebook and pressed his palm against the cover like a runner tying their last knot. Not a prayer exactly. More like a promise to show up as the person he'd been becoming since that first mirror. On Saturday Night Live, Jimmy Fallon was unstoppable. His impressions became viral before viral even existed. Elvis, Sandler, Seinfeld. He turned his quirky obsession with voices into comedy gold. He wasn't polished. He wasn't perfect. He laughed at his own jokes, broke character in the middle of sketches, and somehow the audience loved him even more for it. Fallon was chaos with charm, and in the late 1990s, that was enough to make him SNL's crown jewel. Every week, America tuned in not just for the skits, but for the sense that Jimmy was having as much fun as the audience. He made comedy feel like a living room game, where mistakes were part of the magic. Critics compared him to the greats. Fans lined up outside Rockefeller Plaza with homemade signs. To the outside world, Fallon had arrived. But comedy is cruel. What makes you shine on one stage can leave you stranded on another. When Fallon left SNL to chase Hollywood, the magic didn't follow. He landed leading roles, romantic comedies, buddy films. The posters promised stardom, but the box office said otherwise. His movies stumbled. Reviews called him lightweight. Some said he lacked the gravity to carry a film. The laughter that once felt inevitable suddenly vanished. From the heights of Rockefeller Plaza to the silence of empty theaters, Fallon faced the nightmare every comedian dreads. No laughs. Hollywood didn't just reject him, it erased him. Agents stopped calling, casting directors passed. For the first time, Jimmy felt the weight of failure not as a funny punchline, but as a full stop. Imagine being 30 years old, told you'd peaked too soon. Imagine having your dream job at SNL, risking it all for something bigger, and realizing you might have walked away from the one place where you truly belonged. Fallon admitted later, those years broke him. He doubted himself. He wondered if maybe the critics were right, that his awkwardness, his silliness, his vulnerability weren't assets at all, but proof he didn't belong. And yet, inside that silence, a new thought began to form. If Hollywood didn't want him, maybe it wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was just a detour. Because what Fallon had wasn't just jokes, it was connection. People loved him not in spite of his cracks, but because of them. And that truth would soon carry him back, not to the big screen, but to a stage where connection mattered even more, late-night television. When Fallon left Hollywood in disappointment, few expected him to recover. His movies had stumbled, critics labeled him lightweight, and whispers suggested his best days ended with SNL. But NBC handed him something rare, a second chance, late night, a stage once owned by Letterman and Conan, and with it the heaviest weight for any comedian, the pressure to prove he belonged. Many doubted him, too soft, too nice, too vulnerable, but Fallon leaned into those very doubts. Instead of mocking guests, he laughed with them. Instead of sharp monologues, he built games. His sketches weren't attacks, they were invitations. Late-night television stopped being a wall between host and audience. With Fallon, it became a playground. Slowly, something shifted. Viewers tuned in not just to laugh, but to participate. They saw a host who wasn't untouchable but approachable, one who could sing badly, trip over lines, and laugh at himself. Fallon turned vulnerability into connection, and that connection into ratings. Late night became his laboratory. Lip-sync battles were born, musical parodies went viral before viral was currency. Guests who once came to be interviewed now came to play. Fallon wasn't reinventing comedy, he was reinventing late night itself. By 2014, the stakes were bigger than ever. Fallon wasn't just taking over another show, he was inheriting The Tonight Show, America's late-night crown jewel. Carson had defined it, Leno had secured it. Now Fallon was asked to carry it into a new era. Millions questioned, did he have the gravitas? Fallon's answer was simple. He wouldn't out-serious his predecessors. He wouldn't mimic their style. He doubled down on being Jimmy, playful, silly, unashamedly human. And in doing so, he opened The Tonight Show to the world. From lip-sync battles to games with presidents, Fallon transformed late night into a global playground. Suddenly, The Tonight Show clips weren't just watched at midnight. They were shared the next morning in classrooms, offices, and across continents. Fallon didn't just inherit a stage, he expanded it to the internet, to every phone, to every feed. But with the crown came criticism sharper than ever. Some still called him lightweight. Others said he lacked the bite late night demanded. Yet Fallon stayed true to his formula: joy over judgment, play over cynicism. For every critic, millions of viewers tuned in, not to see him dominate, but to see him connect. In turning vulnerability into his brand, Fallon did more than keep The Tonight Show alive. He redefined it, not as a pulpit of authority, but as a stage where presidents danced, icons laughed, and audiences across the world felt like part of the game. In comedy, laughter is the currency. Timing, delivery, punchlines, these are supposed to be the weapons. But Jimmy Fallon built something rarer. He built a connection not with perfect timing, but with imperfection. His secret wasn't control, it was release. Release of ego, release of polish, release of the idea that a host has to stand above the audience. Through every stage, SNL, Hollywood's failures, late night, and The Tonight Show, one constant remained: vulnerability. Fallon didn't hide his flaws. He cried on air when tragedy struck. He admitted his nerves before big interviews. He laughed so hard he broke character, sometimes derailing entire sketches. In an industry obsessed with control, Fallon let go. Some saw this as weakness. Critics labeled him unserious, too soft, even naive. But millions saw something else. They saw themselves. Because the truth is, audiences don't connect with perfection. They connect with reflection, with people who mirror back their own fears, awkwardness, and hope. Fallon became that mirror. In being imperfect, he made everyone feel less alone. It's easy to think of vulnerability as a flaw, a crack in the armor, but cracks let light through. When Fallon admitted his fears, audiences felt permission to admit theirs. When he stumbled, they remembered it was okay to stumble too. His job was comedy, but his impact was deeper. He gave people space to be human. Think about the moments that define us. Rarely are they polished, rehearsed, flawless. They're messy. They're filled with laughter that breaks mid-sentence, tears that arrive uninvited, and silences that say more than speeches ever could. Fallon brought that humanity onto a stage watched by millions. He wasn't teaching us how to laugh. He was teaching us how to be. In a culture of highlight reels and carefully curated personas, Fallon doubled down on honesty. Not the dramatic kind, the awkward kind, the silly kind. The kind that makes you cringe at yourself, but also makes you smile because you realize everyone else is cringing too. He proved authenticity doesn't push audiences away. It pulls them closer. And maybe that's the deeper lesson. Fallon didn't outwit every competitor. He didn't outmuscle critics. What he did was outhuman everyone else. He turned the very thing most people try to hide, their insecurities, into a superpower. And in doing so, he created something more lasting than laughs. He created trust. Jimmy Fallon's story isn't about being the most talented. It isn't about being fearless. It's about something harder to measure, the ability to hold on to a dream when logic says to let it go. He wasn't bulletproof. He doubted himself. He stumbled in Hollywood. He admitted his fears, broke character, laughed nervously at his own mistakes. And yet, in those same cracks, he carried something powerful, an irrational faith that refused to let him quit. That faith didn't make him invincible. It made him serious. It forced him to prepare, to study, to reinvent, to take the raw clay of vulnerability and mold it into something authentic. And authenticity was what people fell in love with. Not perfection, not polish, but Fallon being fully messily himself. From cardboard furniture to Rockefeller Plaza, from failure to reinvention, Fallon lived the paradox that sometimes your doubts make your faith stronger and your flaws make your connection deeper. He showed us that vulnerability without faith can break you, but faith without vulnerability can make you hollow. Together, they become a force that carries you through rejection, through ridicule, and into rooms no one thought you'd enter. Fallon didn't become eternal because he never wavered. He became eternal because even while wavering, he chose to keep going. He chose to believe when it looked ridiculous to believe. And that's what made his comedy, his hosting, his presence, human, magnetic, unforgettable. So here's the question. What part of yourself do you hide, thinking it makes you weak? When paired with faith, it could be your superpower. If Jimmy Fallon could turn insecurity and irrational belief into a legacy that touched millions, what could you build with yours? This was just one story. At Innovator's Path, we believe every path starts the same way, with a fragile dream, a shaky table, and the courage to keep believing anyway. So if this story resonated with you, share it. Comment with the part of yourself you've been afraid to show. Subscribe and keep walking with us. Because every path starts with one story.